The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel is awash in soft, romantic lighting. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests, and the air is filled with the scent of roses and peonies carefully chosen to match the bride's bouquet. Every detail of Madison and Jason's wedding has been meticulously planned, from the custom monogram napkins to the selection of wine sourced from Jason's family vineyard. Madison, the radiant bride, is the picture of perfection in her designer gown, her makeup expertly done to highlight her natural beauty. She beams with happiness, holding Jason's hand as they move through the crowd of well-wishers. Jason, tall and handsome in his custom tuxedo, seems equally blissful. Together they look like a couple straight out of a magazine, destined for a life of luxury and love. Among the guests, Jason's father, Richard, moves with the ease of a man accustomed to power. At 55, Richard is still strikingly handsome, with salt and pepper hair and a physique that speaks of years spent maintaining his appearance. As the CEO of a successful corporation, Richard is used to being the center of attention, but tonight he's content to let his son have the spotlight. But for those paying close attention, there's something unsettling in the way Richard's eyes linger on Madison, something that goes beyond the pride of a father-in-law. It's subtle. A glance that lasts a moment too long, a smile that carries a weight of unspoken memories. Madison avoids his gaze, focusing on Jason, her heart pounding in her chest. She prays. No one notices the tension, the silent current running between her and Richard, a secret they fought hard to keep buried. As the night progresses, the guests settle into their seats, ready for the highlight of the evening, the wedding slideshow, a curated presentation meant to showcase the couple's journey. From the moment they met to this very day, the mood is light, filled with laughter and anticipation. But Madison feels a cold dread creeping up her spine. She knows what's coming, even if she doesn't know exactly how or when. And when the lights dim, she realizes her perfect world is about to shatter. The ballroom hushes as the first slide appears on the massive projection screen. A beautiful image of Jason and Madison on their first date at a cozy cafe in Paris fills the screen. Soft music plays in the background as the audience watches the story of their love unfold. Smiling photos from vacations, holidays, and intimate moments follow one after the other, each one carefully chosen to depict the perfect relationship. Madison forces a smile, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Jason leans closer, whispering something sweet in her ear, but she barely hears him. Her mind is elsewhere on the photos that should not be in this presentation. Photos that could expose everything. The guests laugh at a silly picture of Jason and Madison at a Halloween party, their arms wrapped around each other. The next slide shows them hiking together, sweat-soaked and smiling. Everything seems perfect, just as it should be. But then something changes. A photo appears that Madison recognizes instantly, but it's not from her shared life with Jason. It's a private moment with Richard, taken at a secluded villa in the French Riviera. In the photo, Madison is sitting on the edge of a sun-drenched pool, her legs dipped in the water while Richard stands behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder in an all-too-familiar way. The room falls silent. Jason's smile fades as he stares at the screen, confusion turning to shock. Madison's heart pounds in her chest as she waits for the next image, praying that it's not what she fears. But the next slide is even worse. It's a photo of her and Richard in a hotel room, their bodies tangled together in a moment of passion. The intimate nature of the image leaves no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Gasps ripple through the crowd and whispers spread like wildfire. The air in the ballroom becomes thick with tension. Jason's expression hardens as he realizes what he's seeing. His eyes dart to Madison, then to his father, Richard, who stands frozen in place, his face pale. The slideshow continues, but no one is paying attention anymore. The damage has been done. Chaos erupts in the ballroom. Guests murmur in disbelief, exchanging shocked glances. Jason's mother, Linda, who has been sitting beside Richard, suddenly stands, her face a mask of horror. She drops her champagne flute, the delicate glass shattering on the marble floor. Her eyes are wide as she looks at her husband, then at Madison, trying to comprehend the betrayal that's just been laid bare for everyone to see. Jason turns to Madison, his face contorted with a mix of rage, hurt, and disbelief. "What the hell is this?" he hisses, his voice trembling with fury. Madison opens her mouth to respond, but no words come out. Tears well up in her eyes, but she knows no amount of crying will undo what's just happened. The truth is out and there's no going back. Richard takes a step toward Jason, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Jason, let me explain." He begins, but Jason cuts him off with a vicious glare. "Explain. What is there to explain? You slept with my wife." Jason's voice rises, drawing even more attention from the guests. His fury is palpable, radiating off him in waves. "How could you do this to me?" "To Mom." Linda lets out a choked sob, covering her mouth with her hand as she backs away from Richard, her eyes filled with disgust. She can't even look at him. The betrayal is too deep, too raw. Madison stands in the center of it all, feeling the walls close in around her. The wedding she had dreamed of, the life she had imagined with Jason, is crumbling before her eyes. She wants to scream, to run, to disappear, but she's trapped in this nightmare of her own making. Without another word, Jason storms out of the ballroom, leaving Madison standing alone in the midst of the wreckage. The guests, unsure of what to do, exchange awkward glances. While some begin to quietly slip out of the room, not wanting to be part of the unfolding family drama, Richard stands frozen in place, his face ashen as Linda walks past him, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She doesn't look back. Jason bursts out of the ballroom and into the night, desperate for fresh air. He heads straight for the hotel's rooftop terrace, his mind racing with anger and betrayal. The cool breeze does nothing to calm the storm inside him. He leans against the stone railing, staring out over the city skyline, but all he can see in his mind is that image. Madison and his father together in that hotel room. It's burned into his memory, a permanent scar that will never fade. Behind him, he hears footsteps approaching. He doesn't have to turn around to know it's Richard. The man who raised him, the man he once admired, is now the source of his deepest pain. "Jason, please," Richard says, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Jason spins around, his face twisted with rage. "Didn't mean for it to happen. How do you accidentally sleep with your son's wife?" He steps closer to Richard, his fist clenched at his sides. "How long, Dad? How long has this been going on?" Richard runs a hand through his hair, his expression pained. "A few months," he admits, his voice barely above a whisper. "It started after you and Madison had that fight. She was upset and I was there for her." Jason lets out a bitter laugh. "So this is my fault now because we had a fight. You decided to comfort her by sleeping with her." He shakes his head in disbelief. "You're unbelievable." Richard tries to reach out, but Jason pulls back, his eyes filled with hurt. "Don't touch me," he snaps. "You've already taken enough from me." There's a long, heavy silence between them, filled with all the things neither of them can say. Finally, Richard speaks again, his voice broken. "I'm sorry, Jason. I never meant to hurt you." Jason stares at him, his anger slowly being replaced by something darker. "Sorry isn't good enough," he says quietly. "You're going to pay for this, both of you." Without another word, Jason turns and walks away, leaving Richard standing alone on the rooftop, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on him. The next morning, the news of the scandal has spread like wildfire. The hotel staff whispers about the disaster that unfolded at the Davenport wedding, and by noon, the story has made its way to the society pages of every major newspaper. Madison and Jason, once the golden couple of the social elite, are now the subject of gossip and ridicule. Madison, hiding in the suite she was supposed to share with Jason on their wedding night, watches in horror as her life unravels. She hasn't heard from Jason since he stormed out of the ballroom, and she doesn't know what to do. She's alone, terrified, and unsure of what comes next. Richard, equally devastated, retreats to his penthouse apartment. His once pristine reputation is in tatters, and his family is crumbling around him. Linda refuses to speak to him. She has locked herself in their mansion, and Richard's attempts to reach her have gone unanswered. He spends hours staring at his phone. Torn between calling Jason and letting him cool off, he knows that he has ruined everything and has no idea how to fix it. For Madison, the isolation becomes suffocating. She can't leave the hotel without facing a barrage of reporters eager for a quote or a photograph. She watches her phone obsessively, waiting for any sign that Jason might be willing to talk, but it remains silent. Her mind races with panic and regret. The wedding, the future she had envisioned, is all gone. Unable to bear the weight of guilt, Madison decides to confront Richard. She manages to sneak out of the hotel, avoiding the paparazzi, and drives to his penthouse. When Richard opens the door, he looks just as wrecked as she feels. His usually immaculate appearance is disheveled, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "What do we do now?" Madison asks, her voice barely above a whisper. She steps into the penthouse, the tension between them thick. Richard sighs deeply, shaking his head. "I don't know," he admits, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "I didn't think it would ever come to this." Madison stands in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering despite the warmth. "Do you think Jason will ever forgive us?" Richard looks at her, guilt etched in every line of his face. "I don't know if he can or if he should." Madison sinks onto the couch beside him. Feeling the weight of the inevitable, "I don't know what to do anymore." Richard, for once, has no answers. All he can offer is a silence that speaks of their shared ruin. In the days that follow, Jason isolates himself completely. He doesn't go back to the hotel, nor does he reach out to his mother. Instead, he buries himself in his family's country estate, miles away from the city and the chaos that now defines his life. The sprawling property with its vast empty rooms serves as both a refuge and a prison. He wanders through the halls, consumed by thoughts of revenge, unable to escape the images of betrayal that haunt him. He knows that what he is planning will change everything forever, but the more he thinks about it, the more he becomes convinced that it's the only way to deal with the betrayal. He can't move on, can't simply forgive and forget. That would be letting them off too easily. They deserve to feel the same pain, the same helplessness that they inflicted on him. His plan takes on a new form, growing more complex with each passing day. He starts making arrangements, careful not to leave any loose ends. His mind sharpens with a singular focus: revenge. Madison, still trapped in limbo, begins to unravel emotionally. She tries calling Jason, leaving voicemails, begging him to talk to her, to meet and work things out. But Jason never responds. The silence is agonizing, and every day that passes deepens her sense of hopelessness. Meanwhile, Richard's life begins to crumble further. His business partners are wary of the scandal, and whispers about his personal life have begun to seep into the professional realm. Linda finally contacts him, but it's not to reconcile. Instead, she files for divorce, demanding half of everything. Richard knew it was coming, but the finality of it hits him like a punch to the gut. The life he had carefully built is now disintegrating before his eyes. But as they all go about their lives, they remain oblivious to the darkness brewing in Jason's mind, a darkness that is about to be unleashed. 2 weeks after the wedding disaster, Madison receives a text from Jason breaking the silence that has been eating away at her. It's short and to the point. "Meet me at the estate tomorrow, noon. We need to talk." Her heart leaps with a mixture of fear and relief. Is this the reconciliation she's been hoping for? Has Jason finally decided to give her a chance to explain? She tells herself that this is her opportunity to fix things, to somehow make it all right again. That night, she barely sleeps, her mind racing with possibilities. She imagines the conversation they will have, the way she will apologize and explain her side of the story. She convinces herself that Jason still loves her, that he's finally ready to hear her out. The next morning, Madison dresses carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit. She wants to appear sincere, vulnerable. She drives out to the estate with her heart in her throat, trying to stay calm. The countryside is peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. When she arrives, Jason is waiting for her outside the grand entrance. He looks calm, almost too calm, and something about his demeanor unsettles her, but she pushes the feeling aside, eager to believe that this is the start of their reconciliation. "Thank you for meeting me," she says softly as she approaches him. Jason nods, his expression unreadable. "We have a lot to talk about," he says. His voice is flat, devoid of the warmth she once knew. He turns and walks into the house without another word, and Madison hesitates for a moment before following him inside. The estate is eerily quiet. Jason leads her to the drawing room, where he motions for her to sit. The tension in the air is palpable as they face each other, the distance between them, both physical and emotional. Madison sits on the plush chair, wringing her hands nervously as she waits for Jason to speak. The room is filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Jason remains standing, pacing slowly back and forth, as if gathering his thoughts. Finally, he stops and turns to her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Madison, I've had time to think about everything that's happened," he begins, his voice calm but cold. "I've been trying to figure out how we got here, how you and my father." He trails off, unable to say the words. Madison's eyes well with tears. "Jason, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. It was a terrible mistake, and I've regretted it every day since. Please, can we just talk about it? Can we try to fix this?" Jason watches her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he nods. "I've thought about that, too. Maybe we can work through this." His words are measured, careful, but Madison clings to them like a lifeline. "Really?" she whispers, hope sparking in her chest. Jason sits down across from her, leaning forward slightly. "But before we can move forward, we need to clear the air. I need to understand why. Why him? Why my father?" Madison swallows hard, struggling to find the right words. "It wasn't about him, Jason. It wasn't even about you. I was lost, confused. We were fighting all the time. And Richard, he was there for me when I felt like you weren't. But it was wrong. I know that now. I just want a chance to make things right." Jason listens intently, his face a mask of calm, but inside his mind is worrying. Every word she says only solidifies his resolve. He's playing a part, luring her into a false sense of security. She thinks this is the beginning of their reconciliation, but Jason knows better. This is the beginning of the end. He reaches out and takes her hand, his touch sending a jolt through her. Madison looks up at him, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. "I need some time to process everything," Jason says slowly. "But I'm willing to try for us." Madison nods eagerly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, Jason. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Jason squeezes her hand gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "You will," he says quietly. "You'll do exactly what it takes." After Madison leaves, Jason's next move is to reach out to his father. The plan is already set in motion, but he needs to ensure Richard plays his part perfectly. He sends a message to Richard, inviting him to the estate as well, framing it as a chance for a heart-to-heart conversation. Richard, desperate to make amends, agrees without hesitation. He sees this as his opportunity to explain himself to his son, to try and salvage what's left of their relationship. When Jason calls, his voice sounds calm, almost forgiving, and Richard clings to that hope as he drives out to the estate the following day. Jason watches from the window as Richard's car pulls up to the house. He takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he's about to do settle over him. But there's no turning back now. The trap is set, and soon both Madison and Richard will pay for what they've done. Richard enters the house, calling out for Jason as he steps into the grand foyer. Jason emerges from the drawing room, his face carefully composed. "Dad," he says, his voice steady. Richard approaches Jason, a mixture of hope and apprehension on his face. "Jason," he begins, his voice unsteady. "I'm glad you wanted to talk." Jason leads him into the same drawing room where Madison had been earlier. The room, with its opulent decor, now feels suffocating, the weight of the recent events pressing down on both men. Richard sits down on one of the plush chairs, his posture tense. "I've been thinking about what happened, and I want to apologize for everything. I know it's not enough, but I truly am sorry." Jason, still standing, surveys his father with a cold, calculating gaze. "I appreciate the apology," he says, his voice measured. "But this is not just about saying you're sorry. It's about understanding why it happened and what it means for the future." Richard nods, his eyes filled with remorse. "I understand. I want to make things right, if that's even possible." Jason sits down opposite him, his demeanor calm, but his mind racing. "There's something you should know," Jason says slowly. "I've been giving a lot of thought to the future, and I believe there's a way to move forward, but it involves a difficult decision. Richard looks at him, confused. What do you mean? Jason takes a deep breath, his heart pounding. I've decided that the only way to deal with this is to start fresh, to cut ties with the past entirely. Richard's eyes widen. What are you talking about? Jason stands up and walks over to a side table, picking up a stack of documents. He brings them back to Richard and places them on the coffee table. These are divorce papers, he says quietly. I want you to sign them. Richard's face goes pale as he looks at the documents. Divorce papers. But I'm still married to Linda. Jason shakes his head. Not anymore. Linda has already filed for divorce. These papers are for the dissolution of the business partnership between us. I can't continue working with you after what you've done. I can't be connected to you in any way. Richard stares at the papers, his hands trembling. Jason, please, this is too much. I'm trying to make amends. Can't we work something out? Jason's eyes are cold and unyielding. This is the way it has to be. You need to sever all ties, both personal and professional. It's the only way for me to move forward. Richard looks up, desperation in his eyes. Isn't there another way? Can't we find some middle ground? Jason's expression softens for a brief moment, but he quickly hardens again. I've made my decision. You and Madison have destroyed my trust. I can't work with you or have you in my life any longer. With that, Jason turns and walks out of the room, leaving Richard alone with the divorce papers. Richard sits there, overwhelmed by the enormity of what is happening, the weight of his actions. The loss of his family and now the loss of his professional life all crashed down on him. A few hours later, Madison arrives at the estate again, her nerves frayed by the constant turmoil. She has been waiting for Jason to reach out, but the silence has only grown more pronounced. Her hope for reconciliation is now mingled with fear of what Jason might be planning. As she walks through the grand entrance, she's greeted by Jason's steely gaze. He leads her back to the drawing room, where Richard is still sitting. Looking utterly defeated, Madison's heart skips a beat when she sees Richard. Richard, what's going on? Jason gestures toward the documents on the coffee table. These are the final steps, Madison. We're closing the chapter on everything. Madison's eyes widen as she takes in the situation. What do you mean, Jason? What are you doing? Jason takes a deep breath, his resolve unwavering. I'm cutting all ties with you and my father. This is the end of our relationship, and the end of my father's involvement in the business. Madison's face pales. Jason, you can't do this. It's not going to fix anything. Jason's expression is unyielding. It's the only thing that will bring me any semblance of closure. Richard, his voice trembling, tries to speak. Jason, you don't understand. I'm trying to fix this. Please give me a chance. Jason shakes his head. There's nothing left to fix. You've shattered too much for any repair to be possible. With that, Jason turns to Madison. I'm done with this. You have until the end of the day to leave the estate. After that, I don't want to see you again. Madison's heart sinks as she processes his words. Jason, please don't do this. I'm begging you. Jason's face remains a mask of cold resolve. It's too late. You both made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. Madison looks at Richard, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. Richard, I don't know what to say. Richard shakes his head, tears of frustration and regret streaming down his face. There's nothing left to say. The following days are a blur of chaos and despair. Madison and Richard both leave the estate, each carrying the weight of their own regrets and shattered dreams. Madison returns to her old apartment, but everything feels hollow. The life she had imagined with Jason is gone, replaced by a painful reality she can't escape. Richard faces a similar struggle. His business empire, once a symbol of his success, is now in disarray. He's lost his family, his career, and his dignity. The humiliation of the scandal and the loss of his son's respect are wounds that may never heal. Jason, meanwhile, tries to rebuild his life from the ashes. He throws himself into his work. Distancing himself from the personal connections that once defined him, he remains detached and distant, his relationships with family and friends strained by the betrayal he experienced. The story of the Davenport wedding scandal fades from the headlines, replaced by newer dramas. But for those involved, the impact lingers. Madison, Richard and Jason each struggle with their own sense of loss and betrayal, trying to move forward in a world forever changed by the choices they made. The wedding that was meant to be a celebration of love and commitment ended in a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. Months pass. The tension between Madison and Richard has reached its peak. Both are struggling to cope with their shattered lives, their once bright futures now clouded by betrayal and revenge. Madison, feeling the weight of her choices in the depth of her despair, becomes increasingly unhinged. Her attempts to reconnect with Jason have failed, leaving her isolated and desperate. Richard, meanwhile, is grappling with his own emotional turmoil. The loss of his business, his family, and the ongoing public scrutiny have driven him to the brink. He starts to believe that there's no way out of the mess he's found himself in. The idea of retribution for what has happened to him begins to consume his thoughts. One rainy evening, Madison receives an anonymous message on her phone. The message contains a photo of Richard, along with a cryptic warning. Revenge is best served cold. Tonight, things come full circle. The message sends a chill down Madison's spine. She knows Richard is struggling, but she's unsure if he would actually go so far as to seek revenge. Nevertheless, she feels compelled to act. In a fit of desperation and fear, she decides to confront Richard one last time. She arranges to meet him at an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place she knows he frequents when he's feeling particularly distraught. Richard arrives at the warehouse, his face drawn and weary. Madison, clutching a concealed weapon, waits in the shadows. The eerie silence of the warehouse amplifies the tension between them. When Richard finally steps into the dimly lit space, Madison steps out, her heart pounding. "Richard," she calls out softly, her voice echoing off the walls. "We need to talk." Richard turns, startled by her presence. "Madison, what are you doing here?" Madison's face is a mask of anguish. "I'm here because I couldn't stay away. I thought maybe we could try to fix things, but I've received a message and I'm scared. I don't know what to do." Richard's eyes narrow. "A message from whom?" Madison hesitates. "I don't know. It was anonymous." Richard's expression hardens. "You think this is some sort of game that you can just show up and everything will be okay?" Madison's fear transforms into rage. "No, Richard. I think you've done enough. I think you've ruined everything." In a sudden, desperate act, Madison draws her weapon and fires. The shot echoes through the warehouse and Richard crumples to the floor, his life ending in an instant. Madison stands there, breathing heavily, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. Before she can fully comprehend what she's done, she hears a noise behind her. She spins around to see Jason standing in the doorway. His face, a mask of shock and cold anger. He has been following Madison, suspecting she might do something drastic. "What have you done?" Jason demands, his voice a harsh whisper. Madison turns to him, her eyes wide with terror. "Jason, please. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just trying to fix things." Jason's face is expressionless. "Fix things by killing my father." Madison's voice trembles. "It was a mistake. I'm so sorry." Jason steps forward, his eyes narrowing. "You've caused enough damage. It's time for you to face the consequences." Before Madison can react, Jason pulls out a weapon of his own. In a swift and brutal motion, he ends her life, leaving her lifeless beside Richard's body. The warehouse falls silent once more, the only sound, the steady drip of rain on the roof. Jason stands over their bodies. His expression, a mixture of cold satisfaction and profound sorrow. He knows that this is the end of the line for them all, the final devastating act in a tragedy that has unfolded with shocking inevitability. The next morning, the warehouse is discovered by the authorities, and the news of the murders sends shock waves through the community. The police find Madison and Richard's bodies, along with the traces of the violence that occurred. Jason, having meticulously covered his tracks, remains hidden, his identity concealed behind a carefully crafted facade of grief. In the aftermath, The investigation uncovers the sordid details of the affair and the ensuing revenge. The story of the Davenport wedding, once a tale of personal betrayal, becomes a tragic narrative of violence and death. The media frenzy surrounding the case fuels public fascination and horror, with each new revelation more shocking than the last. Jason's actions, while initially shrouded in mystery, are eventually exposed. His cold and calculated decisions, driven by a desire for retribution, come to light. The once respected heir to the Davenport fortune is now a figure of infamy, his name synonymous with the tragic events that unfolded. As the investigation concludes, Jason is charged with the murders of Madison and Richard. The trial is a media spectacle, with every detail of the case scrutinized and dissected. Jason's demeanor throughout the proceedings is detached and unemotional, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil of those he has left behind. In the end, Jason is found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. His once promising future is reduced to a grim reality behind bars, a fitting end for a man whose quest for vengeance led to such catastrophic consequences. The Davenport wedding, once a symbol of love and celebration, becomes a dark chapter in history, a reminder of the destructive power of betrayal and the far-reaching impact of revenge. The lives of those involved are forever altered, their stories intertwined in a tragic narrative that continues to haunt those who remember. As the years pass, the story of the Davenport wedding fades from public memory, but the scars it left behind remain. For Jason, Madison, and Richard, the consequences of their actions will never be forgotten, their lives forever marked by the choices they made and the violence that followed.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.